The thing I love about Silicon Valley is our mantra. If you can measure it, you can manage it. And I love being in a place like that. The question then is, what do you measure? What matters? And you can measure your 401k, you can measure your GPA, you can measure your kids' GPA, you can measure your stock portfolio, you can measure the square footage of your house, which is worth just insane amounts of money here in Silicon Valley. And those are all good things. But I want to ask you, when you face the judgment seat, are those things that God's going to care about? And to be frank, I don't think so. So then the question is, well, what's actually worth measuring? And what's interesting is that in Luke chapter 7, John the Baptist sends his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah? And he answers in 222 characters in the Greek with the proof that he's the Messiah. It fits in a tweet or an X or whatever Zuckerberg or Elon Musk wants to call it these days. I don't even know. This is his answer. The blind receive sight. Well, actually, what he says is, go and tell your disciples what you've seen and heard. In other words, here's the data. Here's the data that proves I'm the Messiah. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Now that is worth measuring. When we face the judgment seat, that's the stuff that God cares about. And yet I know very few churches, very few companies, very few organizations, very few people that are saying, let's measure that. So 3 years ago, a group of us got together and said, hey, let's work on measuring that. This is my wife, Dr. Angie Bymaster. Actually, Ted's wife, Sandra Haas, was our first patient. And we said, hey, let's go out and measure that and see what happens. And praise God, now we're 3.5 years later, and it's happening. I want to share a quick story about the lame walk. I met Juan on the corner of First and Alma Street where he was panhandling. When Juan was 12, his legs had been blown off by a hand grenade. And ever since then, he had dreamed of being able to receive prosthetic legs. Recently, he immigrated to the U.S. with a goal of achieving his dream of legs. Here's Juan climbing up the stairs to his house. The Healing Grove team jumped into action, and we were able to help Juan achieve his dream. Juan got legs. And just a few weeks ago, Juan came into Healing Grove to show us both his legs and his ticket to go back to Colombia, where he could now provide for his family with a job and legs. The lame walk. That's what I want to measure. Now, here's the reality. Silicon Valley is one of the wealthiest places in the world, and yet we have a lot of poverty, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. In Silicon Valley, which we define as Santa Clara and San Mateo County, so this isn't even including San Francisco County, there are 12,000 homeless people. Underneath the surface, there are 300,000 people living in poverty, of which almost 180,000 are children. We have a lot of poverty, that's living in the shadow of affluence. And the question is, how do we proclaim good news to the poor at scale? Here's, I think, what the problem, this is what the gentleman was asking back there. We have this idea that there are two forms of organizations. There are for-profits that exist to make money and create employment. And there are nonprofits that offer, services and referrals to low-income clients. And we put them in completely separate categories. And the problem is it's very difficult to scale nonprofit solutions because you're dependent on the benevolence of donors, which I would love to say that Silicon Valley is a generous place. The data suggests otherwise. We have data in Silicon Valley, people on average give about 0.8% of their income. In case you didn't know the math, they keep 99.2%. Christians are a little bit better. Church of Sending Christians give about 3 or 3.5%. But we are not really generous people, even though we have so much wealth. So we came up with this idea of let's mix those. Let's sell a service and use the money to generate income to care for the poor. So we came up with this model where we actually sell at Healing Grove Health Center, we sell concierge primary care for $200 a month. You get same-day appointments, 30 to 60-minute appointments with your doctor. You get a doctor that both prays and prescribes. We're the only Christian primary healthcare in Silicon Valley. You get the personal cell phone of your doctor, and then what's cool is every paying member funds 2 low-income uninsured people. So we are a nonprofit. We do solicit donations and grants, but we're also selling a product, and that has allowed us to scale very quickly. So we launched in 2020 with a hope and a prayer, and we were totally broke. This is a picture of a dilapidated building that we refurbished. A team of us got together that included, I want to recognize Sandy Kane right here, who is our originating board chair and one of our founding members. By the end of the year, we'd refurbish the building and launch operation, and we're seeing hundreds of patients. And today, 3 years later, we've gone from seeing hundreds of patients a year to this year, we've done 12,000 patient visits. We've grown, yeah, praise God for that. We've expanded to 4 sites with the 5th one coming online. We're working with low-income Spanish-speaking refugees in San Jose and recently arrived Afghan refugees in Sacramento, where we're proclaiming good news to the poor. We've seen hundreds of people come to Christ, lives transformed. We've seen the blind see, the lame walk, the dead raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. So, I want you to just put out your hands. And I want you to ask the question, what has God put in your hands? What ideas, what resources, what finances, what organization? I'm captivated by this passage in Luke chapter 15 where Jesus said, I tell you, use your worldly wealth. And doesn't that apply to us here? Use your worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. So that when it is gone, and it will be gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What has God put into your hands that you can use to gain friends on this earth so that we can celebrate in the eternal dwelling? That might be a for-profit company. That might be a nonprofit organization. That might be an idea. That might be a relationship. I don't know what it is, but God has put something in your hands. Proclaim good news to the poor. Let me give you an example. We had hired a sports director, a guy named Noe Guzman from the neighborhood, grew up really poor, awesome coach. And we launched it as a nonprofit program. So kids in low-income communities don't have access to sports. Soccer costs $10,000 a year. It's crazy how expensive it is. So we fundraised, we launched a program serving low-income kids in the community. We've served hundreds of kids that would otherwise have no access to sports. Actually, in our first summer, we had 50 kids who on average lost 6 pounds. I mean, it works, right? And so my wife signed up my son for a volleyball camp, a weekend volleyball camp. And we paid $400 for volleyball camp, which killed me. So he gets home and I said, well, how was it? And he said, well, it was okay, but Coach Noe is better than what we paid for. And it was like a light bulb. Ding! We have a service that we can sell. And so now we're launching Healing Grove Sports, where we're selling summer camps for $175 a week to people with means. And every paying member funds a low-income kid to get the same high-quality access to sports programs so that their lives can be transformed. And what we're able to do is we work in low-income communities where we have very high adverse childhood experiences, kids who've experienced abuse and all kinds of problems like we were just talking about. And we're able to use sports as a vehicle to achieve true healing in Jesus Christ so that they can have confidence and dignity so that they can grow up into the kind of adults that can support themselves. So I want you to think about what's in your hands. And as you think about what's in your hands, I want you to think about, what are you measuring? Because what you measure matters. What would it be like for you to measure the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor?
My wife was undiagnosed with pernicious anemia, which once it's diagnosed is great news. But if you don't know what it is, it's very scary, the symptoms of ALS. And I was in a networking meeting and connected with Brett. And so if you didn't notice, Brett is a Christian. He's a follower of Jesus. If any of you were mildly offended by what he was sharing, I mean, he's my type of guy, prove it by what you show it, Trust me, he's an equal opportunity offender, and he has offended far more Christians than he's offended non-Christians. Anyways, I met him at a networking meeting, and we just connected about our passion for helping the poor. And then I cried on his shoulder and said, you know, my wife's dying and I don't know what's going on. And he says, well, let me introduce her to my wife and maybe she can help. And she says she basically says she has a gift of discernment. She practices medicine as unto the Lord, and she integrates her faith into her medical practice. It sure felt to me like she was in touch with a higher power. She diagnosed my wife in the first time, even though she had never had a case of pernicious anemia before, and it was kind of complicated. 13 experts had just pawned her off. And when we went in, when the whole world was locked down, we got the diagnosis that she started injecting herself with B12. And talk about the lame walk. I mean, she started walking again and recovered. So I'm a huge fan.